Hello everybody and welcome to today's edition of Daf Yomi. Today's Daf is Makkos Daf 7b and the center of focus is the legal principle of mistaken identity and its implication of capital punishment, specifically dealing with the laws of Ed Zomerman, conspiring witnesses. Key points. Number 1. The case of the Ed Zomerman. The Talmud continues to discuss the law regarding witnesses who are proven to be false. They are punished and with the same penalty they try to inflict. The Daf focuses on a case where the witnesses claim to have seen a person commit a murder, but they were actually mistaken about the identity of the victim at the other time. Number 2, mistaken identity versus false testimony. The crucial distinction is drawn. If the witnesses intended to swear falsely but were mistaken about the specifics, e.g. they thought A killed B but the person they saw was C, they are still considered a Zomerman and receive the appropriate punishment. If, however, the court finds they were sincere and completely mistaken about the entire event, the law is different. Number 3, the penalty of the Basin. The Daf debates whether the Basin applies a death penalty to a Zomerman on the basis of a mistaken factual claim, like we saw him kill the man, or only on the basis of their attempt to have the accused killed. The conclusion leans toward the attempted outcome being the key factor for their punishment. The court discussion of Makkos 7b establishes that a witness is liable to be punished as an aid Zomerman even if the testimony is based on a genuine, albeit profound, error of identification, provided that the court intention was to testify about the commission of the crime. The law prioritizes the prevention of judicial murder and punishes the malicious intent to mislead the court, even if the details of the testimony are later shown to be factually confused or erroneous. Let's dive into the text. To finish up from the last Omud, just say the Mishnah quickly. There are people who are exiled. Anyone who kills a person unintentionally, whether one is liable to be exiled, depends on the particular circumstance of the case. If one was rolling a roller or to smooth the covering of a mortar that he applied to seal his roof and the roller fell upon the person and killed him, or if one was lowering a barrel from a roof and it fell on a person and killed him, or if he was descending a ladder and it fell upon a person and killed him, in all these cases he is exiled. But if the one pulling the roller toward him and it fell from his hands upon a person and killed him, or if one was lifting a barrel and the rope was severed and it fell upon a person and killed him, or if he was climbing a ladder and it fell upon a person and killed him, that unintentional murderer is not exiled. This is the principle. Any murderer who kills unintentionally through his downward motion is exiled, and one who kills not through his downward motion is not exiled. So let's see the footnotes. What does that mean? Any murderer who kills unintentionally through his downward motion, the principle is that one who commits unintentional murder in a downward motion is liable to be exiled, and one who commits unintentional murder not in a downward motion is exempt to be exiled. And that's in the Ram Sefer Nezikin, Hilchot V'Seich U'Shmirat HaNefesh 6:13. Although Shmuel derives this principle from a verse, the Rambam explains its rationale as follows. Since everyone is aware that items fall, and that falling items or people pose a danger to those below, presumably any incident that occurs as a result of a downward motion can be attributed to a lack of caution, and therefore the unintentional murderer is exiled. For that incident to result from an upward motion is rare and borders upon being an action performed due to circumstances beyond his control, and he is not exiled for it. And that's from the Meiri. So let's go into the Gemara. The Gemara asks, with regard to the principle that one is exiled only if he killed unintentionally through a downward motion, from where are these matters derived? It is derived from a verse. Shmuel says that the verse states with regard to those exiled to a city of refuge, and he cast it down upon him and dies, Numbers 35:23, indicating that one is not liable to be exiled unless the item falls in a downward motion. The sages taught in a Brisa the derivations from verses written with regard to unintentional murder. Unintentionally, in Numbers 35:11, to exclude from exile the one who kills intentionally, unawares, Deuteronomy 19:4, to exclude from exile the one who kills with intent. The Gemara asks, why is a derivation necessary to exclude one who kills intentionally? It is obvious that he is not exiled. He is subject to the death penalty. Rather, Rava said, say that the type of unintentional killer referred to is meant to exclude the one who says it's permitted to kill the victim. So what does that mean? If one was of the opinion that it's permitted to kill, his action is bordered on the intentional, and he is not exiled to the city of refuge. Nefesh 6:10. Kill the victim. The verse teaches that the person is neither executed nor is exiled. Abai said to Rava, if the reference is to one who says that it is permitted, he is the victim of circumstances beyond his control, as he did not know any better. How could that be characterized as intentional? Rava said to him, that is not a problem, as I say that with regard to the one who says it is permitted, his action is bordered on the intentional. With regard to exile, there is no difference between one whose action was performed due to circumstances beyond his control and one whose actions bordered on the intentional. In neither case is the murderer exiled. One who acted due to circumstances beyond his control is not exiled because he is not guilty at all. An atonement provided by exile will be insufficient due to the severity of the transgression of one whose action bordered on the intentional. The Rambam maintains that there is a difference in the halachic status of the two with regard to the case of a blood redeemer taking vengeance. If the blood redeemer kills an unintentional murderer who acted due to circumstances beyond his control, the former status is that of a murderer. But if the blood redeemer kills an unintentional murderer whose action bordered on the intentional, he is exempt. The Brisa states, unawares, to exclude from exile the one who kills with intent. The Gemara asks, with intent? It is obvious that he is not exiled. He is subject to the death penalty. Rabbi said the reference is to exclude the one who acted with the intent to kill an animal. The action of one who intended to kill one person and killed another bordered on the intentional, and he is not exiled to the city of refuge. And that's Navam Seif in Nefesh 6:10. And he killed the person inadvertently, or one who acted with the intent to kill a Gentile and killed a Jew, or one who acted with the intent to kill a non-viable newborn and he killed a viable newborn. The sages taught in a Braita, based on the verse with regard to an unintentional murderer, and if suddenly without enmity he thrust him or cast upon him any vessel without lying in wait, in Numbers 35:22. If suddenly, this serves to exclude one who unintentionally kills another that he encounters at a corner. Rashi explains the term suddenly. Befita is referring to an immediate and proximate occurrence. In this case, one with a knife in his hand who collides with another victim when rounding a corner was not yet next to the victim when drawing his knife. See the victim Rabbeinu Hananel. One who unintentionally kills another while rounding a corner is not exiled to the state of refuge, as his action is bordered on the intentional. Nefesh 6:10. Without enmity, this serves to exclude one who unintentionally kills his enemy. If one unintentionally kills an enemy, he is not exiled to a city of refuge, as presumably his action borders on the intentional. An enemy in this context is anyone who did not speak to him for 3 days due to enmity. Nefesh 6:10. As even if the act appears unintentional, the presumption is that it was not. He thrust him. This indicates that even unintentionally, if he unintentionally shoved him with his body, the action of one who caused the death of another by shoving him with his body borders on the intentional, and he is not exiled to the city of refuge. Nefesh 6:10. The language of the Braita indicates that he is exiled even in that case, and Rashi explains that the reference is to one who pushed another without the intention to do so. The Rambam and the Meiri maintain that the Braita should be understood. He thrust him, to exclude one who shoved him with his body. One who shoves another and causes his death is not exiled, as his actions border on the intentional, and killed him he is liable to be executed or cast upon him. It serves to include the case of a downward motion, that is for the purpose of an upward motion. Yerida shehi zorech aliyah, one who kills another while performing an upward motion, and one who kills another while performing a downward motion that was performed for the purpose of an upward motion is not liable to be exiled. The case of Mishnah and others find that the Rambam's ruling on this matter difficult. I'm safe in Nefesh 6:13. E.g., if one bent down in order to lift an item from the ground, and then in the process of bending down he killed another unintentionally, he is exiled, without lying in wait. Below Sadiya. Rashi explains that the term Sidia is related to the term Sad, side, and it means facing a particular side. If one was facing one side and an item slipped out of his hand and he went into a different direction, he's not liable to be exiled, as it is deemed an action performed due to circumstances beyond the control. The Rambam agrees. The Meir explains the reason that he is not exiled is that the action bordered on the intentional. This serves to exclude one who had the intent to throw a stone to this side and then went to a different side and killed a person. The action of one whose intent was to throw an item to one side but it went in a different direction and killed another bordered on the intentional, and is not exiled to the city of refuge. As the Rambam says in the Ezekiel Shemirat HaNefesh 6:14. And it is written with regard to an unintentional murderer and who did not lie in wait, Exodus 21:13. This serves to exclude one who had the intent to throw a stone 2 cubits. These are cases where the item flew farther than he intended, e.g. 4 cubits instead of 2, or 8 instead of 4. Tosfos cite 2 explanations suggested by Rashi in Bava Kama 26b. According to one explanation, from this verse derived that one who does so is not liable to execute as a murderer, but is liable to be exiled. According to the second explanation, he is exempted from exile as well. Tosfos and Beit Hananel agree with the second explanation, as in that case his action borders on the intention and therefore the atonement provided by exile is insufficient. The Rambam agrees. The action of one whose intent was to throw an object 2 cubits and who threw it 4 cubits and killed a person borders on the intention and he is not exiled to a city of refuge. Rambam says in Ezekiel Shemirat HaNefesh 6:10. And he inadvertently threw 4 cubits and killed a person, and it is written concerning an unintentional murderer, and as one who goes with his neighbor into the forest, in Numbers 19:5, from which is derived just as the forest is the owner's property, and there is permission for the victim and for the assailant. Maya Arishus the Nizak Mazik, one who is liable to be exiled only if he unintentionally murdered another in a place where it is permitted for both the victim and the assailant to enter. Therefore, if one enters the courtyard of another without permission, and the owner of the courtyard murdered him unintentionally, the owner is exempt from exile. If one entered with permission, the owner is exiled. Rambam says in Ezekiel would say Shemirat HaNefesh 6:11 to enter there, and so too unintentional murder that occurs in any place where there is permission for the victim and for the assailant to enter is punishable with exile. The unintentional murder of one who entered the assailant's property without his permission is not the cause for the murderer to be exiled. The Gemara cites a related discussion. Rabbi Abahu raised a dilemma before Rabbi Yochanan. If one was ascending a ladder and the rung was displaced, Nishmat Hashliva. The question is whether the determining factor that caused the death of the person below is the action of the person, in which case it is an upward motion, or that of the item, the rung, whose motion was downward, says Rashi. One who unintentionally kills in a downward motion that is for the purpose of an upward motion is not exiled to the city of refuge. How so? If one was climbing a ladder and a rung was displaced from beneath him and killed the person below him, he is exempt from exile. See the case of Mishnah and others who seek to reconcile the opinion of the Rambam and the Gemara. Rambam says in Ezekiel Shemirat HaNefesh 6:14, beneath him, and the rung fell and killed another. What is the law with regard to it being exiled? In a case like this, is considered killing in an upward motion as he was climbing the ladder, and therefore he is exempt. Or is it considered killing in a downward motion, as when he stepped on the rung he pushed it down, and therefore he is liable? Rabbi Yochanan said to him, in the scenario you described, you already touched upon the case in the brighter side of both the case of unintentional murder that is performing the downward motion, that is for the purpose of an upward motion. The ruling in the brighter is that one is liable to be exiled in that case. Rabbi Abahu raised an objection to the explanation of Rabbi Yochanan from the Mishnah, which states, this is the principle. Any murderer who kills intentionally through his downward motion is exile, and one who kills not through his downward motion is not exile. Rabbi Abahu clarifies, with regard to the phrase in the Mishnah, one who kills not through his downward motion, what case was that not already specified? Does this add to serve to add? Is it not to add a case like this, and to teach that even though the death was caused by the falling wrong, since the assailant was ascending the ladder at the time, he is not exiled? Rabbi Yochanan replied, and according to your reasoning, that this apparently extraneous phrase serves to include a case that was not addressed explicitly with regard to the previous phrase in the Mishnah. Any murderer who kills unintentionally through his downward motion, what case was that not already specified does this serve to add? Rather, one may say that it serves to add the case of a butcher. Here too, in the latter clause, the phrase, one who kills not through his downward motion, serves to add to the case of a butcher, as it is taught in a Bible with regard to a butcher who is chopping. A butcher, katzav, called by this name because he chops and cuts. Makatzav, the meat of the animal, using a cleaver and a small axe to cut the parts of the animal limbs and its bones, in order to effectively cut the meat in a manner that will cause as little damage as possible. The butcher must employ great force. He therefore raises the cleaver and lowers it powerfully. Occasionally, in order to generate great momentum, he lowers the implement behind him and then raises it above his head and lowers it onto the meat. And there's a picture here how he does it. Upward motion from behind him, upward motion in front of him, upward motion behind him, down motion in front of him. Most involved in cleaving meat. Animal limbs with a cleaver. One sage told that if he killed a person in front of him, he's likely to be exiled. If he killed a person behind him, he is exempt. It is taught in another bite, if he killed a person behind him, he is liable. If he killed a person in front of him, he is exempt. And it's taught in another bite, both he killed a person in front of him and he killed a person behind him, he is liable. And it's taught in another bite, both if he killed a person in front of him and he killed a person behind him, he is exempt. And although these bites appear contradictory, the apparent contradiction is not difficult. When a butcher is about to cut the meat of an animal, he raises the cleaver and lowers it behind him in order to create the momentum that will generate power. Then he raises the cleaver from behind him and brings it down forcefully onto the meat. In that process, the butcher lowers the cleaver in front of him and behind him and raises the cleaver both in front of him and behind him. Each of the four biters addresses at different stages of the process. Here the biter says that he is liable if he unintentionally murders a person in front of him and is exempt if he unintentionally murders a person behind him. He is referring to a case where the butcher swings the cleaver with a downward motion in front of him. Rashi explains that whether it was before or behind him, whether he lowered the axe in order to raise it, or whether he raised the axe in order to lower it, the determining factor is the motion that he performed. If he raised the axe, he is exempt, and if he lowered the axe, he is liable. The Ritva agrees. Rabbi Hanani explains that if his objective was to raise the axe, he is exempt if the murder was caused in a downward motion, and if his objective was to lower the axe, he is liable even if the murder was caused in an upward motion. Rabbi Hanani adds that this is the understanding in Jerusalem Talmud. The Rambam agrees. In a case where the butcher chopping meat raised his arm, the arm holding the cleaver behind him, and lowered it in front of him to break a bone, if he killed in the course of the initial motion that entails raising the cleaver in front of him and lowering it behind him to create momentum, he is not liable to be exiled. If he killed in the course of the second motion, which entails raising the cleaver behind him and lowering it in front of him, he is liable to be exiled. The principle is any murderer who kills unintentionally, though there is downward motion, is exiled, and one who kills not through downward motion is not exiled. This is according to the explanation of Rabbi Hanani and the Jerusalem Talmud. Rambam says from Ezekiel Herod to Seich Shmirat HaNefesh 6:13, and an upward motion behind him. There the Brisa that says he is exempt if he unintentionally murders a person in front of him, is liable if he unintentionally murders a person behind him, is referring to a case where the butcher swings a cleaver with an upward motion in front of him and a downward motion behind him. In addition, here the Brisa where he is liable in both instances is referring to a case where the butcher swings with a cleaver with a downward motion in front of him and behind him. There the Brisa where he is exempt in both instances is referring to a case where the butcher swings a cleaver with an upward motion both in front of him and behind him. The two phrases that constitute the principle in the Mishnah teach that the determining factor is whether the motion is upward or downward, not whether it is in front of him or behind him. This is Rabbi Yochanan's reply to the objection of Rabbi Abahu. The Gemara suggests, let us say the Rabbi's dilemma with regard to an unintentional murder committed by one climbing a ladder is subject to a dispute between Tanaim. If one was ascending a ladder and its rung was displaced from beneath him, it is taught in one bite he is liable, to another bite he is exempt. What is it not that the Tanaim disagree with regard to this? As one sage holds, it is unintentional murder in a downward motion, and therefore he is liable. And one sage holds it's unintentional murder in an upward motion, and therefore he is exempt. The Gemara rejects that parallel. No, it is not the point of contention, as everyone agrees that it is an upward motion, and there is no dispute between the sage and the brighter. Nevertheless, the apparent contradiction between them is not difficult, as here, in the brighter that rules him liable, the reference to payment of damages. In the case of one who is ascending a ladder and the rung was displaced from beneath him and caused him damage, if the rung was not tightly fitted and sturdy, he is liable to pay damages, provided that it took place in the domain of the victim of the damage. If the rung was tightly fitted and sturdy and was displaced or became worm-infested, he is exempt, and that is considered an act of God. The Mirgan Mishnah writes that the Rambam had a variant reading of the Gemara, and if you wish, say instead that in both this brighter and that brighter the reference is to damage. Rambam say from Nazich and Hilchot over Mazik 6:4 Shulchan Aruch Mishpat 348:3. As regards to one's liability to pay damages, there is no difference between upward and downward motions, or between intentional and unwitting damage, and there in the brighter the ruling is exempt. And the reference is to exile, from which one who murders unintentionally in an upward motion is exempt by Torah edict. If you were saying instead that both in this brighter and that brighter the reference is to exile, and it is not difficult, as this brighter where the ruling is that he is liable, is referring to a case where the rung of the ladder was worm infested. Rashi explains that the two answers concerning the stability of the rung distinguish between a case that is considered on upward motion, in which case one is exempt, and one that is considered downward motion, in which case one is liable. Rashi explains that if the rung was worm infested or loose, it was already sagging when he stepped on it, therefore it is classified as a downward motion. If the rung was not worm infested and tightly inserted, it is classified as an upward motion. You have a Hanani and a Ramban, and he should have been cautious before stepping on it. And that brighter, where the ruling is that he is exempt, is referring to a case where the rung was not worm infested, as in that case it is a murder due to circumstances beyond his control, as he could not have anticipated that the rung would be displaced. If you wish, say that in both this brighter and that brighter the reference is to a rung that was not worm infested, and this is not difficult, as this brighter where the ruling is that he is exempt is referring to a case where the rung was tightly inserted into the ladder, and therefore he could not have foreseen that it would be displaced. And that brighter where the ruling is that he is liable is referring to a case where the rung was not tightly inserted, and he should have anticipated its displacement. The Mishnah: if the blade of an axe or hatchet was displaced from its handle. Rabbi Hanai explains, according to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the fact that the blade was displaced from its handle indicates that it was loosely attached, therefore the action borders on the intentional. Others maintain that the displacement of the blade from its handle could not have been anticipated, and therefore its action is due to circumstances beyond the control. That's Rabbi Yonatan Glenel and the root. If the blade is displaced from its handle and killed a person, the one wielding the axe is liable to be exiled in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis. Rambam Sefer Nazik and Hilchot Vatzech, Mishmeret HaNefesh 6:15, and it flew through the air and killed a person. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says he's not exiled, and the rabbis say he is exiled if part of the tree is being split. Rashi explains that in the process of the tree being chopped down, part of the tree broke off and flew through the air and killed someone. According to the Rambam, this is a case where the blade was displaced by the force of the axe striking the tree. The Jewish Talmud and Rabbi Hanani cites both explanations. For if the blade was displaced by the force of the axe is striking the tree and killed someone, and the wielder of the axe is not liable to be exiled, as this is the force generated by the strength of his action, and is like an action performed due to circumstances beyond control, in accordance with the opinions of rabbis. According to Rabbi Hananiel, its explanation of the Mishnah and the Gemara, Rabbi Sefer Nazik and Hilchot Vatzech Mishmeret HaNefesh 6:15. Flew through and killed a person. Rabbi Hanasi says the murderer is exiled, and the rabbi says he's not exiled. It is torn in a brighter. The Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said to the rabbis, it is stated in the verse, and the blade displaces from its wood handle, but isn't stated and the blade is displaced from the wood, Deuteronomy 19:5, indicating that it is a wood chip from a tree that causes the death of the person. And furthermore, 8 is stated below, and the blade displaces from the 8. And 8 is stated above, earlier in the same verse, and his hand wields the axe to cut down the 8. Just as the term 8 stated above is referring to wood from a tree that is being split, so too the term 8 stated below is referring to wood from the tree that is being split, not the wood of the axe handle. Ramachia Bar Ashi says that Rav says in both of them, Rabbi Yehuda and Nasi and the rabbis interpreted one verse to arrive from the other rulings. The verse states the blade displays the Menashe from the wood. Rabbi Nasi holds the tradition of the manner in which the verse of the Torah written is authoritative, and one derives halachot based on the manner in which words are written, not on the manner in which they are vocalized. It is written v'nishel, a transitive verb, indicating that the blade displays wood chips from the tree, and the rabbis maintain the vocalization of the Torah is authoritative. The written form of the Torah as it appears in the Torah scroll lacks vowels. All Hebrew letters are consonants, but several letters occasionally serve as matris lectionis. The Latin term whose literal meaning is mothers of reading. When used in this manner, these letters Aleph, Hey, Vav, and Yod are not pronounced at all, but indicate the correct pronunciation of the words in which they appear. A word can thereby be written defective without these additional letters or plen with them. Some sages maintain that the tradition of the manner of which the verse in Torah written is authoritative, and one derives halachot based on the spellings of the words. By contrast, others hold that the vocalization of the Torah is authoritative, meaning that one derives halachot based on the pronunciation of the words. Although it diverges from the spelling, this dispute applies only when the written and vocalized text of the Torah are entirely different. If it is possible to reconcile the two readings, as in the case here, this is certainly preferable. And we read the term as venashal and intransitive verb indicating that the blade is displaced from the wood and handle kills a person. The Gemara asks, and does Rabbi Nossi hold that the tradition of the manner in which the verses in the Torah are written is authoritative? That's the end of the Omer. Thank you very much for listening, and wish you a very good day. All the best. Bye.